So now let's look at a 2D example of this. Here I've basically shown you a 9 by 9 image just as a sample, and we will actually work around with this. And note that basically I filled it in with a lot of zeros and 90s, and just to keep the approach simple, these were intentionally designed to be values so we can actually do some simple math with. What we want to do now is smooth some aspects of this to be able to generate a newer, smoother image. Here is the new image that I want to start filling in the values for. Notice again that in this image, I've actually given values of 90s. You can imagine them to be the peak value of the image. And again, I've left some holes with a 0 here, a black point, and also 90 here to kind of give it some diversity and see how that actually generates itself. To help us do this, let's actually look at a 3 by 3 neighborhood. So while this image is 9 by 9, I want to actually use a 3 by 3 neighborhood to be able to then smooth out. And basically the intention is that every time I apply this 3 by 3 neighborhood, I want to generate a new value at this point and place it here. Okay, that's the goal. So of course, by looking at this, you can start guessing that if I was to do a simple linear average, that is, take the sum of all of this and divide by 9, I would be able to come up with a value that I could place in here. And that value, of course, would be 0. Let's keep moving. And now next time what I'll do is I want to move this one frame here because we want to actually raster scan and move this all over this image to be able to generate newer versions of the output image. Now doing the summation over all of this neighborhood here, you would basically see the summation is simply 90. And of course, I have 9 divided by 9 elements. So you can predict what the next value is going to be, 10. And we can keep doing this one after the other. Moving to the next one, 180 is the sum, divided that by 9, 20. And you can see basically how we can start filling up all of the values of this output matrix. Once I'm done with this part here, of course, I filled in the 10. And now I need to rotate around and now start looking at these values here. Move here, 0 again. 3 values of 90, so 270 divided by 9. And using this, I can get all the way to the end here and filled in all of the values that came out of this process. Now, one thing you may notice that because the way we looked at our neighborhood of 3 by 3, and we are replacing the value here, which is value here, this whole top row and the 2 edge columns and the bottom row are, of course, not filled. We'll discuss how to fill that up in a bit. So while this thing is filled up, let's now start looking at what really happened and what we can learn from this. So a couple of interesting things happened. There was a 0 here. If you notice, this 0 is now in this image replaced by a much higher value because, again, if you notice it in both directions, this pixel would have been, or this intensity has been smoothed out. Similarly, there was a 90 here and it's been reduced to 10. And again, you may argue that actually the whole image now is much smoother in these things. Now, of course, there were 2 reasons we could have done this. One, maybe this was some sort of an error, or maybe we just want to blur some information out. And again, both we will look at in careful detail, blurring or removing noise and error. To help visualize this, let me actually show this with a little bit of information that's not just numbers, but shades of gray. To achieve this, what I'm doing now is creating the same image, except now I'm giving white values to all 90. Assume this to be 255 equivalent, scale to 0 and 90. And all the blacks are, of course, still 0. So this is my original image. And I want to do is basically run the same process and see what the output looks like. So this would be what the output would look like for that image. Again, smoothed out by an average filter that's a 3 by 3 rubbed over the whole image. And if you notice again, most of the 90s persist here because that's where majority of the information was, much more in the neighborhood the same. And the rest of it is kind of now a simple smooth ramp, as opposed to in this one where it goes to 90 to 0 and 90 to 0 here. All that kind of jagginess has been removed.